Is with us, and we are so privileged to be joined by Ashley McGuire. She's a senior fellow at the Catholic Association and an organization that did tremendous work on religious liberty, especially during the COVID period. So thank you for that. You were here during the 2013 conclave. So you've now had an opportunity to kind of be on the periphery of this experience and that one. What is different from a tone standpoint or from a subject matter standpoint as you've been listening to these conversations happen here in Rome and at the Vatican over the last few days?
Well, I think one thing that's really different about this conclave is we have the most diverse group of cardinals in the history of the Church, the largest group, the most diverse. You have cardinals coming from places that never had cardinals before. In addition to that, they don't know each other that well. And you mentioned COVID. I mean, that really delayed their opportunities to get to know each other. So I think that adds, conclaves are always unpredictable, but I think that adds a particular degree of unpredictability this time.
You know, Senator Santorum, you just heard Rob talking about it, that he likened it to a political convention. I read an article just the other day that was talking about that this is not about right or left or Democrat versus Republican. This is about talking about Jesus, following in his footsteps. This is about celebrating the resurrection of Christ and what Catholicism means and being a leader of the Church and reuniting it of what it used to be, right? When Pope John Paul II, you were here, 4 million people versus Pope Francis, 250,000. What do you think?
The Pope has many jobs, but I'd break it into two categories. One is to be the shepherd for the Church. The other is he is the leader of, I think, the moral leader of the world. I mean, he has that moral clarity and moral voice that represents 1.4 billion people, and that matters. And so we can talk, and we've been talking, and we will talk mostly about how this all works for the Church, but for America, how is this Pope going to interact with Donald Trump and with America, with Europe, with Russia, with Ukraine? Past popes have been John Paul II. Worked with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and took down the Iron Curtain, took down the Soviet Union. I mean, popes can play a huge role. This past pope did not. This past pope, he said he wanted to create a mess, and he did, and he didn't really lead in a way that was compelling and forceful. Are we going to have a pope that's going to return to having the clear moral voice to be able to do that? Or is this one just going to I'm just going to take care of things here? It's a very fascinating discussion.
And being a more effective communicator, right? Because you saw it, right? Do you agree?
I mean, I thought that in many respects he was effective in the sense that he wanted to include people in the conversation. He wanted to ask uncomfortable questions. He wanted to make people feel heard. But as the senator was mentioning, that kind of created confusion and did ultimately create some division. But Ashley, my colleagues up above St. Peter's Basilica made a very important point, talking about how this, for our audience back home, is very different than the political process. And even though we talk a lot about division within the Church, whoever goes out on that loggia has to get 89 votes, it's not just the person who gets the most votes, they have to get a 2/3 majority. So they do have to work together through the Holy Spirit to come up with somebody who's going to be able to shepherd the Church.
You're right, and that person is going to have to shepherd a church facing so many different challenges. I mean, you have, for example, in Africa, places where the church is really growing, places like Nigeria, where 94% of Catholics go to Mass every Sunday. But they do that not knowing if they're going to survive.
Right.
You know, we have beheadings, we have slaughters.
Boko Haram.
But then you have the challenge of secularism in the West, where you have empty churches in Europe. And I think Senator Santorum is absolutely right that when it comes to some of those difficult moral questions, the church right now is in a period where we've seen growing polarization, and some of those synods, for example, they open debates and questions that have led to confusion. And so this next pope is going to have to shepherd a church that faces violence in some parts of the world, moral confusion in other parts of the world. And that's a tall order.
It certainly is. So we have this book here, the College of Cardinals report.
I'm familiar.
And as I was going through it and studying some of these possible papal candidates, which shocked me, Senator.
Papabile.
I couldn't believe that some of them actually support blessing same-sex unions, support receiving communion after, remarrying and not getting an annulment. Celibacy should be optional. We are talking about radical changes that if someone on the far left, one of these people, is elected, this could change the church altogether. I mean, I don't want to scare people, but
could it happen? Yes, it could happen. Has it happened over the past 2,000 years? No, it's never happened over the past 2,000 years.
But Pope Francis, I feel like he did try to
Pope Francis threw those ideas out. But if you look at what the doctrine is of the church now, what it was 11 years ago when he came, it hasn't changed. And I don't think it's going to change. However, the point is, he talks about those things, and those become the center of attention.
That's right.
Not the persecutions of Christians in Nigeria, not the woke culture that's destroying the West. That's the problem. And I think even some on the left there want to sort of get back to fighting the traditional battles, not the. How
about the pro-life activists that were dragged from the clinics praying for the unborn?
All right, we got to toss it back. But one last question, real quick: how many votes do you think this goes, Ashley?
Oh, gosh, that's anybody's guess. I mean, we've had conclaves that were 3 votes. We've had conclaves that were 5 votes. I think this will be longer just because of what I mentioned. But
Ashley McGuire, Senior Fellow at the Catholic Association, thank you.